I think one of the reasons people decide not to run against me is because I am a Democrat. True, but I'm probably one of the least partisan Democrats that you ever met. I don't sit around reading partisan junk food so that I can feel better about myself.
Representative Mathias, how are you?
Sir, I'm great now that I'm here talking to you. Thanks for having me.
Man, that was a barn burner session.
Yep.
You guys were going to the end. People were bringing bills right at the end.
Yep.
There were all kinds of things. I thought you guys were going to go to like May or something, but you survived. You got out in April.
I did, though I would say my very first legislative session, May 2021, we went until May 12th. So I was forged in fire. So if we go to May 12th every year, that's how I was born. So I got the stamina for that.
That's a lot, man. And plus, I got educated on this because it's an election year. You had people coming to the floor, committees, and all kinds of places with things to kind of justify their existence on the legislature. I mean, it was something that people were like, yeah, it happens every single time. When there's a campaign year, people have to at least say, I was for this issue. I brought this issue to the table.
Yeah. I won't impugn anyone's motives, but I will say there was evidence this year because people said it on the floor. They would look up at the cameras, the Idaho public television cameras, and say, I just want my people, my voters to know this or know that, which is so far away from, what's in a piece of legislation that suggests that we are there to campaign.
Yeah.
Which is a problem because that's how incumbents maintain their power, is they utilize public resources and assets to campaign for free. What is it called? Earned airtime, unearned. Yeah. I forget which one it is, but it's one of the reasons incumbents have they're so frequently reelected is because the ones who are there a long time know how to use the assets of the state to reinforce the public's perception of them, get their name out there, keep their name out there.
But it bothers me.
It should bother all of us.
Yeah, it does. It really bothers me because it's not an argument of, like, I had a conversation with the state PTA president, Alexis Morgan, very kindly had me on her podcast recently. It's called Our Kids, Our Schools. Great podcast. I really enjoy it. And we were talking about some real heavy school stuff, tech stuff in schools. And at the end, we were both doing these kind of takeaways. And she said, look, if anybody disagrees, it was like her and me, but we both said, if anybody disagrees with our positions here, like, let us know. We both have podcasts. We'd be happy to have you on our shows. And I really mean that. If somebody listens to that and they're like, hey, Matt, I have a different perspective. And I believe Alexis feels the same way. Look, if you have a different perspective, come out, let's talk about it. There's an openness to two-way dialogue to flush out the better idea. It's like, I got an idea, you got an idea. Let's put them on the table, have them battle each other, and we'll figure out which one works. But having that one-way communication, utilizing public resources to essentially enrich your campaign, that's a distasteful move.
And it's not express. The motive is not intentional or at least explicit. But I mean, every time you stand up on the House floor, you're going to get a camera on you, and there could be thousands of people watching real time. Why wouldn't you take advantage of that, right?
Right. You, to me, are an interesting case because you are a veteran, you're a Democrat, and you're hanging out in one of the most conservative states, not apologizing for who you are, and running unopposed, which means whoever thought they could dethrone you is like, it's not even, the juice isn't worth the squeeze, like, we can't get it. Which means you're doing, in my mind, you'd have to be doing something right. Walk me through what you feel your place is in the legislature as the minority party, and obviously holding on to your position very strongly.
Well, I think in any one party state, what you lack fundamentally is true competition of ideas. So when I come to the building, I feel like my job is to bring an informed version of a perhaps alternative perspective. Or if I agree with a bill or a sponsor on something, how do I refine it and make good things better? But I'm not in that building to be right. I'm not in that building to try to convince people I'm smarter than them or I'm better than them or that my ideas are better. I'm in that building to win on behalf of my residential property taxpayers in District 19, which is by far the most common complaint when I knock on 100 doors, which I will do regularly. Residential property taxes. How can I keep my kid's teacher from fleeing the district for a higher paying district or out of state? How can basic stuff. And so I tend to get more frustrated, and I'll try to call flags when we're talking about things that I think are just I don't know what I would call them, but there seem to me to be some issues that come to the legislature because someone just dragged a rake through social media comments looking for things that gets people all worked up, and then all of a sudden we're debating it on the House floor. I like to follow the 100 doors principle. If you knock on 100 doors, any 100 doors in the state, how many times are you going to hear about people inadvertently but knowingly feeding flesh or bone to another human being? I can't speak for every district, but in my district, if that came up, it's going to come so far down the line that a good conservative legislature would never dedicate any of its time to it, because not only are you tackling things that no one's going to tell you on a door, but there's a displacement effect. You're using staff, you're using LSO resources, you're using taxpayer dollars. I mean, it costs $30,000 a day to convene the legislature. So I think we need to be a little scrutinous when we're deciding how we're going to spend all those hours at $30,000 a day. And so,
if I may, just real fast, for the people that are not aware with the cannibalism bill and revision that came up, could you give a little background here? MTU Studios is the proud producer for the Ada County Sheriff Podcast, the Idaho Wildlife Federation Podcast, the State Representative Ted Hill Podcast, the Idaho State PTA Podcast, and many more. If you or your organization is thinking about starting a podcast, MTU Studios would love to help. Just check out mtustudios.com.
Sure. Representative Scott, District 2, ran a bill this year. It passed because it was, who would vote against it? Because the nature of the bill made sense. Cannibalism is outlawed in Idaho. It's been outlawed forever, but the statute, until July 1st, when this piece gets added, what it didn't have in there is it said, Chris, you can't eat flesh, you can't eat bone, that's cannibalism. But what it didn't say is you can't invite Matt over for dinner and slip some flesh meatballs into his spaghetti. If you do that and he doesn't know, I would now also be criminally liable. Sure, that makes sense. Let's do that. But that's not happening in Idaho, and it's not happening at a scale that we can justify at $30,000 a day to convene the legislature, that's how we should spend our time when our residential property taxes are getting out of control as we speak. And I talk about residential property taxes a lot because when I knock 100 doors, 89 of them are going to say, could you fix that? That would be great. That would be nice.
How do we fix that?
We have to get comfortable with the fact that there's no silver bullet. This is only silver buckshot problem. When you look at who is paying all of the taxes, all of the property taxes, what you will see over the last 20 years in particular is you will see commercial and ag is going down as a share of who's paying what, and residential is going up. So fixing property taxes, in my mind, means how do we reestablish a sustainable equilibrium? Everyone's chipping in their fair share, and right now it's not fair, and it's getting out of whack pretty rapidly. The property tax bills that the legislature has passed the last few years, 521 this year, 292 last year, those are Band-Aid bills. They don't fix the underlying calculations. They just are, okay, let's give some money back to the residential property taxpayers because we know they're paying so much. So to me, that's the problem. How do we bring back a sustainable equilibrium to who's paying property taxes?
If I may ask, so in the last 20 years, if you see as a portion of the overall property tax bill, you have commercial decreasing as a portion, commercial and ag, and then residential increasing as a portion, that doesn't mean that the overall dollar value that commercial and agriculture bring to the table has decreased. That means it's become a smaller portion of the overall bill, predominantly because we've had such great residential construction growth, right? So you have more doors, more roofs to actually draw a property tax base from in the residential world. Sure. So even though the ag and the commercial are actually paying more than they were 20 years ago, how do we balance it out? Because we're going to have the number of rooftops and residential doors increase at a disproportionate rate to the commercial property and ag property, right?
Right. That's a great question. These are the kinds of conversations that I wish the legislature was having because they're not simple. I would say,
and again, I'm not assuming you have the answer. Like you said, buckshot, like it's going to be a lot of different things. So maybe the formula wiggles a little bit, and then maybe we figure out, instead of taking money from the homeowners in the first place, redo the homeowners property tax calculation so that you don't have to return money to like me after you took the money from me.
Yep. I would say, and you're right, I don't have the answers, but I would say the specific problem that we have to fix is this. I have constituents who might lose their homes this year because they can't pay their residential property taxes. There are farmers in the Treasure Valley who might lose their work in ag land because they can't pay their property taxes. I don't think there are any businesses or corporations in Idaho who are going to lose their businesses because they can't pay their residential property taxes, which just their property taxes, which just suggests to me that the overall load is becoming unsustainable for some payers and is easing up for other payers, and we got to bring some sort of healthy balance back to that.
I got you. The property tax is difficult.
It's very difficult,
especially since, I mean, I think you could make the argument, and again, we don't have to, there's not going to be a solution that we're going to iron out, but I think even the business, saying, hey, businesses aren't going out of business because of property tax, I think that betrays a larger problem, which is that may be true, but in general, rent is tied to the property tax that the landlord has to pay, right? So you have vacant properties that can't lower the asking price for rent because of the bills that they actually have to pay. Or you have property tax going up, which increases the rent for businesses, and then the businesses have to find alternative stuff. So again, complex, right? We're not going to iron this one out right here.
We are not.
Here's another problem.
But I think the finer point that you initially raised is at $30,000 a day, you can imagine how long it would take the legislature to navigate the complexity of this to get to some legitimate outcome that will make a critical mass of people happy. And we don't. Property tax bills are cooked up by a handful of people. They're tucked into some larger bill. And then, we all kind of got to vote on that. And they're usually Band-Aids, money back to you, instead of, we need to figure out how to stop taking the money.
Well, obviously, it's not going. Whatever the solution is not going to be popular. So nobody wants to actually come up with hey, there's a tough pill, but this is the right thing to do. This is the best compromise we have. Everybody's going to, whatever that thing is. I don't know what it is. I guarantee you half the people are going to hate it.
Yep.
So, the Band-Aid is always a better option, which is let's just appease the masses for now, try to, and, we'll kick the can down the road. Talking about another Band-Aid problem. Let's talk about school safety. Because this is a big one. So we had a lot of discussion this session about school safety. Representative Hill did bring, I think it was 415. Was that the
415?
Yeah, right. That was the Second Amendment. This bill in particular was focused on saying, okay, look, there are two problems in school. Okay, the first problem with school safety is having the actual infrastructure, right? So we need to upgrade our doors. We need to upgrade camera systems. Let's get bulletproof glass. Let's get, fences. I'm not a huge fan of the built-in fences around the schools, but be that as it may, there's an actual stage one of let's keep out bad people. There's stage two of school defense, which is if a bad person does gain access, and the overwhelming majority of school shootings, I had a former FBI agent on here a couple months back, Doug Hart, fantastic conversation, but he was saying, look, we have a vision of elementary schools being infiltrated by bad people, and that does happen, and it is overwhelmingly unhorrible. It's evil. It's the worst thing ever. But the majority of school-based violent actions with firearms are actually at the high school. And these are people that don't need to break in because they have the key cards to get in the door. So it's like the fox just walks into the hen house. So there's an aspect of let's fortify our doors, okay? And that might be more relevant at the elementary school. But then there's the aspect of responding once somebody gains entrance, as horrible as this is, right? And these are not fun conversations to have anyway, but they are conversations we should have. The second level is not just fortifying the doors, but actually responding to an actual threat. And this is where Representative Hill's bill came in, which is saying, hey, Second Amendment style, we're going to make schools Second Amendment zones. We're going to take away the gun-free zone sign. And any employee or volunteer, registered volunteer, things of that nature, janitor, bus driver can carry a firearm, right? And there are stipulations. The problem that I heard from a lot of people with that bill is, all right, it requires only an enhanced concealed carry, which is roughly an 8-hour course that you only need to take once. It's not annual training. The district doesn't know who has the firearms, right? There are people, I think it's the superintendent might have a list, but there was some kind of asterisk about there is one person who knows, but other people don't know. There was no protocol put in place in the bill. And again, this is what people, I'm not a school expert. This is what people told me. They said, look, there's no protocol in place once police officers show up. There's no requirement for the school site to network successfully with like sheriff's office, for instance, say, okay, when you show up, we're going to put on, anybody carrying is going to put on this pink vest. So if you see a pink vest, not to shoot that person, something like that. There were a lot of issues that people had with it, but overwhelmingly, there were a lot of people that said, yeah, but we still want this, right? Talk to me about the issues. And again, you're a vet, you understand firearms. What were the issues you had with that bill?
Yeah, and I want to make sure that we leave so all, school shooting, all gun violence in schools issues are school safety issues, but not all school safety issues have to do with guns. And so let's
Right.
save some time to talk about the other non-firearm related school safety issues.
Yeah.
So this is a very complex issue. And I think it's important to start with the really good news, which is we are in a really good place in Idaho when it comes to preventing gun violence in our schools. We're an extremely safe state. Most people who possess firearms, which is a percentage of the population, is a lot, are very smart and responsible in how they manage and store their firearms. And we've never had a fatal school shooting in Idaho. So we're starting from a good place.
Right.
So it's important to acknowledge that. When it comes to allowing people who took 4 hours of class time and 4 hours on the range to carry a firearm in school, the problem that we're creating is we are codifying an assumption that that level of training is adequate to deal with the situation, an active shooter situation. And if we know anything about school shootings, it's that even constantly trained law enforcement officers have an extremely difficult time dealing with active shooters in real time. So the fact that we would allow a volunteer with a concealed carry permit, enhanced concealed carry permit, to bring a firearm into the school is really problematic, because the types of accountability measures and protection measures that you have to have in place just don't work in reality. For example, if I'm a sheriff, if I'm a county sheriff in rural Idaho, and it makes sense that many schools in Idaho already allow people to carry in schools because there's just no law enforcement nearby. So you're on your own if there is a shooting or if there's a threat. If I'm screaming to a scene in my car, sirens blazing, I'm dodging in and out of traffic, or I'm just trying to avoid elk in the road, how am I going to upload the list of people at the school who are authorized to carry and get accurate facials of them so that when I get there, I don't inadvertently shoot them? Because this list isn't publicly available. The superintendent or the principal has it. Right. And then, so when I get there and I see someone shooting or I see someone holding a firearm, I'm going to have to cross-reference their face with the list to make sure they're not on the list. And if they're not on the list, I can take action on them. I can hone in on them. The complexity of all this just won't work. And so the second problem is that when you're talking about firearms in schools, you are ignoring the simple reality that just more firearms generally means more risk. I mean, I don't know if you remember in 2000, so it would have been 2014 or 2015, the legislature authorized essentially, open carry on our post-secondary campuses. And the very first incident was a system biology professor putting a round in his foot in the front of his class. This is just what happens when you have people who don't have to engage in constant training. When you allow them to carry in places where there's kids, it's just a recipe for disaster. So I think the system we have in place right now is pretty good. Districts are allowed to authorize carry. They are allowed to say this is a level of training you need, and that system doesn't appear to be broken. The system, we've never had a fatal school shooting. And I understand the larger kind of context behind all of this, which is 2 years ago, firearms became the number one killer of kids in the United States. I mean, I don't think a lot of people have realized this, but 2 years ago, guns became the number one killer of kids in the United States. And sure, there are some people who say, firearms don't kill people, people kill people. So if it helps those people sleep at night, yes, people with guns killed more kids than anything else killed kids. And so I think the fact that we want to talk about firearms and kids and schools, that makes sense. But this is so new to us. I don't think we've figured out how to handle the nuance and complexity of all of it. But like I said, Idaho's in a good position to start this conversation thoughtfully because low violence, low crime, and responsible gun ownership.
Right. And the statistic with firearms being the number one killer of kids is a tricky business, because you have to flush out. I mean, it's terrible. Absolutely. I'm not justifying any of it, but you have to flush out, like, okay, are these things engagements that were taken up in the public arena, right? Like, we're not saying that school shootings were the number one killer of children. So we could be including, teen gang violence in any inner city.
Suicide by firearm,
right? Like, and the level of suicide is skyrocketing based off of, social media consumption and things like that. Yep. And people are using firearms to terminate their lives, which is actually absolutely horrific. So it's a tricky thing to flush out, because it's like, okay, well, to what degree should the public school be responding to a crisis of suicide and homicide, right? Outside of public schools. Now, again, I'm not saying we shouldn't be responding, but it's a tricky thing to flush out, because when even me as an ignorant, civilian says like, okay, well, what should the policy be? Like, what am I in favor of? Like, what are the actual problems? What are things that are mental health problems? What are things that should be legislated solutions? What are things that are crises of our society, like social media consumption and suicide, right? Like, how are we going to legislate away suicide, right? Like, to whatever degree that contributed to that statistic, how do we address that? And is that something that should be addressed by a safety policy in school, right? It's very complex, right? That's all I'm saying.
It's extremely complex, and there's not always answers to the questions, and we don't even know what all the questions are unless you get enough of the right people who are participating in good faith around the table. You don't even know what all the good questions are. But it's interesting that you talked about legislating to prevent suicide. That's an extremely difficult one. But and I forget the name of the conference, but it's the youth suicide or prevention conference that happened, I think, up in Sun Valley a month or so ago. There was and I was not there, I heard about this though, there was a panel talking about the implications of last year's parental rights bill on suicide prevention. So I forget the bill number, but last year we passed a parental rights bill. I voted for the bill, and it says in the bill, or it says in the now law, that before you can do certain types of assessments, you need to get parental permission.
Sure.
So sure, if I'm going to ask kids about, do they want to drive? Do they want to do sports? With mental health survey, get parents' permission. But what if a child is in emotion of temporary heightened emotional distress and they might be thinking about committing suicide? A lot of school counselors are saying it threatens the kid's health and safety if we have to stop helping them and then track the parent down to get permission to find out if we can ask them the 5 or 6 questions we usually ask kids that we think might be getting ready to commit suicide. So there is a nexus between statute and the legislature and suicide prevention, but until you're having these conversations in good faith and even if they're uncomfortable, you never know what they are. You'll never know what they are.
Right. And talking about good faith, West Ada actually has presented its first revision or first version of what they call the Sentinel program. So it's essentially like a Sky Marshal program that says, hey, we're going to have retired, highly skilled, highly trained, individuals that roam around our schools. There's no particular schedule that people can observe, and these are exceedingly trained and competent individuals that then take away the premise that the school sites are soft targets, because let's say there are 10 schools. They're not going to have 10 people at any time. Maybe they'll have 5 people or 4 people, but you don't know where those 4 people are. So if you're considering engaging in some just horrific act, you're going to have to take that into consideration. It's not like, well, shoot, I can't just walk into the school. There might be an ex-Green Beret or an ex-Navy SEAL walking around. And there actually may be, right? That's the thing. It's not a hollow threat. So it's good faith, which is, hey, look, we didn't have this before. We understand that this is a concern of some of our patrons, some of our clients or customers, however you want to describe them, some of our families in this district, and we're going to take meaningful steps. There were a lot of people, including SROs, that I talked to that were not in favor of 415 because they were concerned about the very things you're talking about. Are the people that have these firearms, say 415 passed, are they trained in how to consider their backdrop? Are they trained in how to move and shoot? Right, like when you're shooting at somebody down the hall, you're not necessarily shooting with a backdrop of an exit door. It could be a backdrop of a wall going into another classroom. These are not bomb shelters, right? It's not like the walls are built from concrete blocks that are going to stop slugs. They might actually go through and hurt someone else. So, again, in good faith, there is this. Okay, look, we understand this concern. We have these tools. We're going to start enacting these different policies. And again, the Sentinel program's in its first revisions, but a lot of promising potential there.
And I understand why that is an appealing concept to explore. For the same reason, if we were going to go get on a
little top off,
please, if we were going to go get on a Delta flight, and we heard that anyone with a enhanced carry was allowed on the plane, we'd be like, what? But if you told us there's a marshal on the flight, we'd be fine. We wouldn't care if they were carrying a 9mm. We wouldn't care because they are trained, they are prepared, and this is their lifestyle. It's not just their job; it's their lifestyle to be prepared for this. And so that's why nobody ever expresses discomfort with armed marshals on their flight, is because they know what they're doing.
Right. And it's such a good point, which is what you keep saying, good faith conversation, because the principle of guns are bad, or like more guns are not the solution. Well, that's not true. In the event of an emergency, if somebody's on campus, you want the good guys with guns there immediately. So at some point you have to acknowledge, okay, another gun wielded by the right person is the solution, you know? And again, it's the good faith where it's like, can we get past the buzzwords where it's like, more guns are not the solution. It's like, okay, well, whose guns?
Right.
You got a problem with a sheriff, like Sheriff Clifford? You got a problem with Sheriff Clifford coming? He's got a firearm.
Yep.
You know, I sit next to him at luncheons and stuff. Like, he's got his firearm right there. I don't have a problem with Sheriff. Like, I feel great sitting next to him. Like, yes, this is the guy, right? So anyway, let's not let this totally dominate. You also want to talk about school safety unrelated to guns.
Yeah, no, I mean, this is all related. You know, there's no clean lines. And the more guns argument, you know, I'm generally, you know, I think one of the reasons people decide not to run against me is because I am a Democrat. True, but I'm probably one of the least partisan Democrats that you ever met. I don't sit around reading partisan junk food so that I can feel better about myself. You know, if you look at who and what organizations endorse me, you got everything from Farm Bureau to Planned Parenthood. It's because I'm a level-headed person. I kind of know what my role is. I'm not that bombastic. But one of the areas where I do get a little heartburn is the kind of the Second Amendment argument that, you know, we need more guns because if we don't have more guns, then that's how we protect the government from taking them. And I've never understood the logic behind that argument, because that's the same as saying, well, I have a First Amendment right to free speech, and if I don't talk more, the government is going to take my First Amendment right. But that doesn't make any sense either. Just talking more doesn't protect your First Amendment right, just like having more guns doesn't protect your Second Amendment right.
Well, wouldn't you, okay, if I may, we saw another bill this session that had to do with the pronouns, right? Compulsory speech. Mm-hmm. And were Representative Hill not to exercise his First Amendment right and make it very clear that he felt this was an infringement, some would argue that we are losing our First Amendment right? Because of the nature of, I can make you say what I want you to say, or you have to say what I want to say. Unless people exercise their speech and say, I don't like that because, right? Like the nature of speech is the very thing that defends our speech, because I can articulate why it is inappropriate or offensive to a set of principles outlined by the Constitution of the United States, that I should not lose my ability to refuse your compulsory language. I think that actually is, and again, I get your point that it's the argument that I need to have more guns so the government doesn't take them away may not be the best argument, but even that, it's like, there's no reason to feel defended if you don't actually have the capacity to defend yourself.
No, correct. The issue with free speech is always going to be trying to discern where the line is when your free speech jeopardizes the health and safety of someone else. And like you, I am not an expert on running a school building or how this, but there is some evidence that for some children who suffer serious cases of gender dysphoria and are just, you know, they're not having surgeries or anything like that. They might be taking hormones, but they're just trying to live a life as their authentic self. Being called by the pronoun they want is important to their mental health. Now, 538, I didn't vote for that bill, but I also don't see that many government employees intentionally misgendering people. But I think underneath it is a larger question about my free speech versus the health and safety of other people. And that's constantly the balance. And, you know, we talked about balance and property taxes. It's the same with, you know, free speech and constitutional law and all of these things. And so, you know, I lost that one. I'm moving on. Yeah.
Yeah. And again, I think it is really complex. I also think it is difficult to flush out. There's a difference between you can't say this and you have to say this. And these are different things. Saying like you can't use some horrific racial slang. Okay, like, or slur. That's great. Like, yeah, let's not do that. But then saying, no, you have to say this. That's a different beast, right? That's where the compulsory language comes in, where it's like, it's not just that restricted language, it's compelled speech. And the second you get control of my ability to express myself, or you get control of what I will express, not what I can express, right? Because again, it's just, there's a couple words you can't say, that's fine. But you have to say this, that's a problem. And again, these are tricky things, right? And I could see, for instance, and our conversation doesn't need to be about this, but I could see the Leah Thomas, a swimmer that swam against Riley Gaines, and they tied. There was a point that I thought was very astute in the kind of digesting of that situation, which is, okay, but what was the commitment that some people say, like, okay, well, this person was a woman. It's like, okay, what was the commitment? Had there been surgery? Had there been hormone shifts? Had there been all these different things? It's like, well, could that person have turned around the next day and said, actually, I feel like a man. I am a man now. And the answer is, yeah, that person could have done that. So it's like, how final is the determination that, okay, this person is absolutely feels that, he or she is a woman, whatever it might be. Anyway, this is a conversation you and I probably are not going to iron out perfectly.
No, we're not. And there are people who are more knowledgeable on the subject than I am, and I tend to defer to them. At the end of the day, I try to come back to, how much freedom do how many people have? Like, if someone who is a biological male, to use that term, decides, no, I've been struggling with this my whole life and I'm going to start living as a woman, like, that doesn't affect me.
Right.
Like, when I was young, people tap me on the shoulder and call me a nigger and then punch me in the face, like, that affected me. So, like, my threshold for what bothers me and what infringes on my freedom is, I think, a different standard than for other people. I don't care if two men are holding hands. It doesn't bother me. It doesn't affect me.
Right. Representative Yamamoto, actually, in a recent interview, I interviewed her 2 weeks ago. She had such a great point that I so appreciate. I find her to be an exceedingly respectable person. And she was like, she was saying that the compulsion towards trying to, or the desire to try to legislate decent behavior between people is actually, in her mind, precluding it to some degree. Because, like, we're trying to force people to be, quote, respectable with each other. And that's creating a backlash amongst people where they're like, get out of here. Like, I'm a respectable person. I just don't like you telling me what to do anymore. Like, I don't want to engage in this. And I mean, that doesn't help us, because the question still remains like, okay, well, what's pushing a boundary? What's inappropriate? What's putting somebody at risk? Like, those are still questions that need to be addressed and flushed out. But her point, I think, is solid, which is the more you force somebody to moral action, the more you rob them of the capacity of moral action. If you have to, it's like a calculator. A calculator is never honest, because a calculator doesn't have the capacity to be dishonest. Unless I have the ability to act in a morally reprehensible way, if I don't even have the ability, I can't be called a moral individual. So it's kind of like, there's an argument that says, look, allow me to be a nice person. Allow me to accept people. Allow me to, voluntarily use people's appropriate or preferred pronouns, whatever it might be. But just allow me that courtesy and capacity. Because one, stopping me from having that starts infringing on theoretical rights that I have, and not theoretical, constitutional rights that I have. And the other side of it is, you also rob me of the ability to be a good person. And I'm trying to be a good person. These are complex.
As am I. Am I.
Good for you.
But that was a tangent back to the school safety thing. And West State is a fascinating case study because, and I forget the school board member's name, but a school board member in West State proposed a policy that would allow local building administrators to prohibit the use or possession of mobile phones in schools during the day, which, let's be honest, these things are not mobile phones. These things are computers with a phone app, and kids almost never use the phone app. So they're computers, but let's call them phones.
That's an astute point. When's the last time two teens called each other?
On their computer.
Yeah, right. Like, it's never that they call each other. I'll do anything to not get on the phone with somebody. I don't even think I called you. It was like email and text.
Yeah. Now, granted, I have learned to re-love one-on-one phone conversations. But so the school district is proposing a policy. I think it's at the second or third reading stage. So they're really trying to do their due diligence and make sure. But it would allow, and I haven't read it, but it would allow local building administrators, principals to say, this is our policy in this building. And that's good, because the needs of 16, 17-year-olds are different than 6 to 7-year-olds in middle school. I watched a local news report on this policy in an interview with this board member the other day. And apparently, and had you thought about it in advance, you could have expected this. The primary thread of pushback from parents seems to be, in the case of an emergency or a shooting, I need to be able to communicate with my kid. and this opens up all kinds of, and sorry to back away from the
No,
mic for
you're
a
good.
second,
You're
but
good.
there's so many issues here. I mean, the first issue is, and the school board member said this, said, if there's ever an emergency, you can call the school and we will get you in touch with your child as soon as possible. Secondly, you know, as a Coast Guard veteran, someone who's done search and rescue, if you're in the middle of an incident response, I mean, and I'm not saying I disagree. I've got young kids and I want to be able to communicate with them, but if you're trained up to respond in incidents to incident management, the last thing you want is 25 people on their phones while you're trying to execute the plan that you've been practicing for a long time. And third, the fact that the proposal itself has to do with instruction and learning, creating a learning environment where teachers can teach and students can learn at least more than what is happening now. This issue of gun violence and security threats in school is trickling over and impacting the ability to have these instructional conversations. And so this is a really, you know, there's no clean lines between any of this. And so school safety, you could argue it's about mobile phones in everyone's hands. You could argue it's about guns. You could argue it's about suicide. You can argue it's about social media. I mean, there's so many things. And this all came to me just as some backdrop. You know, when I got to the legislature, school safety was not at the top of mind for me. But last year, I ran a bill. I think it was House Bill 114 or something like that. And I thought it was a simple bill. It was introduced in the Education Committee and sent to the Judiciary and Rules Committee. And I thought it was such a slam dunk that I didn't work the bill at all. I didn't work the committee at all, and it died in the committee. And what the bill would have done is, currently in state law, there are heightened protections for law enforcement officers. There are heightened protections for healthcare workers. So, you know, if you commit a battery on a law enforcement officer, it's not just battery, but there's a heightened charge of, you know, of abuse on a law enforcement officer. Well, the same thing is true for public school teachers. They have heightened protections. If you hit your high school English teacher, it's not just battery, but it's an additional misdemeanor that a prosecutor can charge you with. And I had talked to a constituent who's a principal, and she wondered why it's okay to punch the lunch lady and the bus driver, but not the teacher. Why isn't everyone else who works at the school protected by this heightened protection? I thought that was a really good reason. So I ran a bill that would have essentially replaced the word teachers with employees. So if you work at a school, if you're part of the team,
you're classified or administration or whatever.
You know, teamwork makes the dream work in these places. And so everyone deserves the same level of protection, but it died in committee. And I don't even think it was that close. And I was a little taken aback by that. And then this year I introduced a bill. It got out of House Education, but it died on the House floor, and it would have required schools that respond to incidents of bullying to send some information home to all the parties involved, so that, you know, the parents of the bully and the parents of the kid who are bullied know this is happening, and really just to kind of prevent things from escalating to a point where kids are taking their own lives, which is how it came to me. And it died on the floor by, I think it was like 38-31 or something like that. So here's two bills that I thought were kind of common sense, straightforward. I brought them and they died. And after both of these bills, a number of legislators came to me, especially this year. A number of legislators came to me and said, you know, Chris, I'm sorry I couldn't vote for your bill, but we do got to do something. There is a problem. Schools need to be safer than they are. And you know, let me know how I can help. And so what
you could have helped by voting for that bill. Like, I'm gonna tell you, the help was last week.
The help was last week. Now that's true, but you know, as a member of the super minority, I don't have the luxury of saying, you know, you were wrong, I was right. Sure. I'm constantly trying to figure out better ways to get my ball into the end zone. And one of the things I realized, and we've talked about this already implicitly, is I'm just little Chris Mathias. I need to have a lot more people around the table saying, oh, let's tweak this word, let's tweak that phrase, let's incorporate this best practice, so that when these bills are being introduced, I got lines of people who are saying, yeah, we need this bill. I'm a principal, I'm a teacher, I'm a and I didn't have that because I thought, you know, the logic of common sense is to assume that what you think is true. But I'm also a trained social scientist, and I was taught that the logic of social science is to assume that what you think is wrong. And I need to start doing more of that. I need to start assuming that this so-called slam dunk bill is actually wrong, and I need to go out and talk to people to help refine these things. And so I'm hoping that this year, this interim, this summer, this fall, I can work on a number of kind of, how do I fix these bills I've tried to run in the past? Are there other areas where superintendents, school boards, teachers, you know, you name it, school counselors would like to see enhancements and improvements, and start running school safety legislation in a more mature inclusive way so that these bills are passing, instead of dying 38-31, they're passing 50-20, 55-15.
Yeah, bringing in the stakeholders and really tapping into them. What was the reasoning behind the downvotes? I mean, obviously, people had to have had criticisms of the bills that they voiced in some capacity, right?
Yeah, with all due respect, they were pretty weak arguments. And if you go back and watch the debate on the House floor on House Bill 539, it was my favorite bill that I've ever run, even though it failed. It was my favorite one because it was an opportunity for me to just stay up on the House floor. I don't think any legislator took as many questions on the floor about a particular bill as I did on House Bill 539 this year. And here's the questions that I received on the floor. Did ICRIMP, the state insurer, get a chance to review this bill? And underneath the logic was, well, if we're gonna say these schools have to send home information when there's a bullying incident and they forget to send it home and something happens with that kid, is the school going to be liable? And my response on the floor was, well, we passed, Representative Hill's, Guns in Schools bill, and ICRIMP said that's a terrible bill and this is going to be really expensive. So we didn't listen to them then. We didn't listen to ICRIMP then. So let's not use ICRIMP's position now to justify voting for it.
Sure.
I heard.
Do you think ICRIMP would have had a problem with the notification mechanisms or something?
I can't guess, but my guess is no, because most school districts already do this. I was just trying to scale up a best practice, and so I can't imagine ICRIMP was going to have any problems.
I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
No,
what was the second one?
Oh, I got questions. Did the School Boards Association vote in favor, or did they endorse this bill? And, they had not, I don't go to them to have them vote. I talk to their people and their representatives to refine bills, but I didn't ask for a letter of support. I got a question on the floor. I forgot who from, about who's a bully? Like, under this bill, who would be a bully? There's no definition of bully. And I thought that was so unusual. I'm a Democrat. I'm accustomed to taking like questions that might be gotcha questions or things like that. But what I referenced was the fact that, our schools are pretty competent. They know who a bully is. If someone goes and makes an allegation that they've been bullied and the school investigates and finds, some minimal evidence that it's a legitimate claim, the person who did that is probably the bully. So I trust the school districts to.
Isn't there a classic definition of bully that's utilized very widely, like repeated and targeted unwanted interactions? Like it doesn't have to be that you're calling them a name. Like, you can be following them around, harassing them. It has to be something that's targeted to a specific individual. Yeah, it's not good if you do it to a lot of people, but if somebody's just popping off to everybody they see, then they're not. That doesn't fall into the guise of bullying or definition of bullying. It's my understanding.
Yes. So there is an element of persistence and consistency that's required. Repeated, but it's not. There isn't a definition of bullying per se. The definition that Idaho state law has is called harassment, intimidation, and bullying. We don't distinguish between the three.
Gotcha.
And yes, it has those kinds of elements. But I will tell you, and this might be something that needs to be looked at, and just because I'm the one talking about it, I'm probably going to be the one who has to do this. That definition doesn't really reflect the nature of modern bullying. I mean, I've heard stories from some of my constituents in middle school telling me that one of the things kids will do these days is they will use their phone, take a video of a kid without that kid knowing, and then, manipulate a little bit and then upload it to exploit that kid's, what they know that the victim's, self,
anxieties or self-esteem issues.
All of it.
Yeah, right.
And,
make their hair crazy, make them paler or something.
And if you read the definition of harassment, intimidation, and bullying in state law, it's really hard for a prosecutor to allege or to suggest and prove that doing that meets the definition. So if a prosecutor can't do it, there's no way a teacher can do it in real time. And all of the mechanisms we have in place to prevent bullying are professional development for teachers and educators. People who are in the classroom where this is happening, they get training every year. And that training is built on the definition of harassment, intimidation, bullying. So if our definition is inadequate, the responses are going to be inadequate. And I think that's kind of the situation we've gotten into these days.
Man, the nature of online harassment and bullying, it's such a difficult thing because in reality, just turn it off. Turn off your phone. Now, that doesn't mean that people aren't going to be talking badly about you, but I don't think you're going to stop. Like, there's no legislation that you're ever going to stop or that you're going to be able to utilize from stopping 10 people getting together and being like, I dislike Matt. Matt's a jerk, right? Whatever. And they all meet at, Sharon's house. Sharon's talking trash about Matt. I don't know. I don't know why Sharon's always the name I use, but it's like they're at Sharon's house and they're like, Matt sucks. He's fat. He's ugly. Look at his dumb hair, his bad hat, blah, 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 which is essentially what you do on social media. Right. And if I'm not there, then I'm never affected by it to the degree that it bleeds into the real world so that people come to school the next day. They're like, I was at Sharon's house last night. She talked mad trash about you. She hates your hat. Like there we get into a problem. It's difficult to flush this out because we're allowing other entities to define the reality and the rules that we engage in. And what I mean by that is we're allowing people to say, my kid has to be on social media. Because we end this conversation right now if people are like, yeah, my kid doesn't have to be on it. It's voluntary. But people will make the argument, my kid has to be on social media. Right. Okay, well, if your kid has to be on social media, first off, says who? And second, what are the rules on social media? The rules on social media are defined by nebulous algorithms that we don't have control of, right? And they're not only defined, they're completely unregulated. So there's no like social media yard monitor that's like, hey, you can't upload goofy pictures of people, right? Or goofy videos of people. So it's like, all right, is it really necessary? And I'm not saying people don't feel it is. And there are some instances, there are plenty of instances of people I know, either my children or because my kids don't have any tech. I took it all away, everything except TV. And we like restrict your TV down big time. Quite unfortunately, the schools still distribute out technology to them, but we have a very tight grip on that. And then I have friends who have very successful like middle school athletes and they're, for instance, on a volleyball team. And this girl is now missing social engagements because every single one of her, she's in 6th grade, every single one of her friends on the volleyball team that she's very successful and a contributor to have social media and have cell phones. And they all have these group texts going back and forth. And this girl misses out on events. But the parents' response is, okay, we're not going to capitulate and give you this piece of technology that you are not ready for and could lead to worse human behaviors, which we all agree happen, right? Because we didn't have a propensity of people taking pictures of themselves like it was going out of style 20 years ago, but we do now with a front-facing camera, right? But the parents are taking additional steps letting the other parents know, hey, look, please text, let's make a parents group, please text me, all these other things. So it's a difficult thing. To what degree do we require a changing of school policy to reflect a voluntary virtual existence?
That's above my pay grade. I don't know, but I will complicate it by saying, and this is something you pointed out earlier, is what role do schools play in all this? One of the things we might not like to admit is that many parents are neglecting many of the responsibilities that they have to promote information and digital literacy in their kids. Kids don't just be mean to each other because they learn it from people. I'm a consultant out of session, and one of my services is kind of in-depth qualitative interviews with small groups. And I'd done some research a couple years ago. Coming out of the pandemic, and a number of parents, when I was asking them about their concerns, one of the things, and I forgot how I asked, but they said, kids learn on social media from adults. The things they're learning, they're not just making up on their own. They're learning because adults do these things. We always hear the saying kids these days. Part of me thinks adults these days. I actually, and try to, walk this talk. I passed someone on the street in downtown Boise last year. You call him I guess the president of the University of Idaho would call this type of person a conflict entrepreneur, like a right wing, big mouth, big thumbs on social media. And I asked this person, I said, hey, I stopped them on the street and I said, hey, would you stop calling people names on the internet? And this person was, I don't know if shocked is the right word, but really taken aback that I would. And they said, really? And I said, yeah. I said, our kids learn from us. So if we're calling one another names on the internet, we are teaching our kids how to call one another names on the internet, and none of us want that. So we have to back up this behavior to ourselves in our own households. And I think a lot of us, especially those, Gen Xers like me who grew up with just the rotary phone with the long cord that you had to go into the side pantry to talk to your friends. Like I think we lack some of these digital literacy skills, and we just aren't willing to admit it. And so a lot of the things that are happening in schools is because of parents like me and parents like us. And I'm trying not to point fingers. This is very much a team effort.
You know, look, I agree with you. We do set the example, but I do presentations on tech safety. Okay. One is geared towards parents, and then one is geared towards teens. And the one towards teens is predominantly focused on the idea that the adults in the room accidentally made a world that they now live in that promotes worse behavior. For instance, teenagers don't look at online porn because they see their dad looking at online porn. Maybe a little bit, but like, how rare would that be? They look at online porn because we put them in a world that provides endless online porn and promotes that. It's not that they're seeing anybody do it. It's that this is what this it's like the old fable of the invisible man, right? And then Gollum in Lord of the Rings. If you put somebody in a position where they can become invisible and partake in the secrets and nuances of people's relationships and social dynamics, they will become a horrible person and greatly disliked, as is the case in both of those stories. I think we could say, hey, we should stop calling each other names online because our kids start calling each other's names. Or we can also recognize that living online as human beings promotes worse behavior regardless of example. There's no social repercussion. You can't call people names in real life to the degree you can online for obvious reasons. Well, whether people know it or not, they're going to start taking advantage to the point that where there is a repercussion. They're going to deliver pain when it doesn't. They're going to take a sucker punch, right? That's the point, right? There's no chance of defense. So I do agree with you that, you know, we need to behave better as an example for our children. But I also think we don't get to take all the credit. And we have to acknowledge that the world we've created for young people is one that is going to promote worse human behavior and more maladaptive behavior in our young people.
I totally agree. Which brings, well, two things. One, just the process of acknowledging that adults and parents play a role in this is by itself an important conversation.
Sure.
It will enlighten us to things we haven't even thought about. But secondly, it brings us back to this West Ada policy, you know, removing computers with phone apps from the laps of all of these students. This is a really fascinating dynamic. This exposes the tension between creating an environment for learning and instruction and emergency preparedness.
Right.
And it's going to be really interesting to see it play out. I will say that I do agree that this needs to be a local district decision, because there's going to be some districts that think this is the greatest policy since sliced bread, and other districts will say, no. My kid absolutely needs to keep their phone. Maybe it can just be a flip phone. Maybe it just needs to be stored in their locker, but they need to have access to it during the day. That's something that the local district should be deciding.
Well, Representative Mathias, I really appreciate you coming. I know you have a hard stop. Thank you for the great conversation. I have so many more questions. We'll have to make this one of many. I appreciate what you do for our district and everything you did this session. I was watching a lot of things you were putting out, and you know, again, as with anything, it's like you don't agree with anything, everything that one person says, but so many of the things, even if I was like, I don't really quite, I was like, that's a reasonable thought though. I just don't quite see it that way. And that's a beautiful thing.
No, I appreciate it. And, you know, this podcast is a beautiful thing. You are providing a public service because just what you said, too many people like to retreat into their own intellectual kingdoms and plug themselves into their information sources of choice, you know, what I call partisan junk, or what Tara Westover calls partisan junk food. And we're losing the ability to have conversations with people and explore nuance and learn to disagree with each other without becoming disagreeable. And that's why I think that this is a public service. So it's an honor to be here, and I appreciate every time you ask.
I appreciate you. Well, again, we'll make first of many.
Sounds good.